Mama! The word shattered the silence of the royal hall like a crack of thunder, and every head turned toward the 3-year-old heir who had just spoken his first word in 6 months. But he wasn't looking at the dozens of carefully selected Omega candidates. He was staring at the trembling servant girl trying to disappear into the shadows. If you're already hooked by this story, wait until you hear what happens next. But first, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because you're about to experience an emotional journey that will stay with you long after this video ends. Drop your city in the comments right now. King Alexandros stood frozen on his throne, his powerful frame rigid with shock. His son, Nikias, hadn't spoken since the day his mother died. 6 months of silence. 6 months of the most renowned healers, the gentlest nursemaids, the most patient tutors all failing to coax a single word from the child's lips. And now this. The girl in question, a young Omega named Talia, looked absolutely terrified. Her honey-colored eyes were wide with fear, her small frame practically vibrating with the need to run. She had only been assigned to the palace 3 weeks ago, working in the kitchens, staying invisible as Omegas were taught to do in the presence of Alphas, especially Alpha royalty. Mama! Nikias said again, louder this time, his small voice cracking with emotion. He pulled against his nursemaid's grip, his little arms reaching toward Talia with desperate urgency. Alexandros descended from his throne, each step measured, his silver eyes never leaving the Omega who had somehow reached his unreachable son. The crowd of noble Omegas, each dressed in their finest silks and jewels, each having traveled from across the kingdom for the chance to become the new queen, watched in stunned silence. "What is your name?" Alexandros asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority that made even the bravest warriors tremble. Talia dropped into the lowest curtsy her shaking legs could manage, her head bowed so deeply her forehead nearly touched her knees. "Talia, your majesty. I'm nobody. Please forgive the intrusion. I was only bringing fresh linens to the..." "Mama! Mama!" Nikias had broken free from his nursemaid and was running across the polished marble floor, his small feet slapping against the stone. He crashed into Talia's legs, wrapping his arms around her knees, burying his face in her simple linen dress. And then he began to cry, great heaving sobs that seemed to release months of stored grief. Talia stood paralyzed, her arms hovering uselessly at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to comfort the child, but touching the air without permission was a crime that could cost her her life. She looked up at the king with pleading eyes. Alexandros felt something crack inside his chest. His son, his precious boy who had become a ghost of himself, was finally showing emotion, finally responding to someone. And it was this slip of an Omega girl who looked like she might faint from fear at any moment. "You may touch him," Alexandros said quietly. The permission released whatever had been holding Talia rigid. She dropped to her knees and gathered Nikias into her arms, and the child clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a churning sea. She began to hum, a soft, wordless melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. Her hand stroked his dark curls with infinite gentleness. The entire court watched in amazement as the inconsolable heir quieted in this unknown Omega's arms. His sobs gradually subsided into hiccups, then into shuddering breaths, and finally into peaceful stillness. He didn't let go of her, but his grip softened from desperate to trusting. "Impossible," breathed Lady Callista, one of the high-born Omega candidates. She was beautiful, educated, connected to 3 of the most powerful houses in the kingdom. She had been certain she would be chosen as queen. "She's a servant. She has no lineage, no standing, no..." "She has my son's first words in 6 months," Alexandros interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "She has his trust, which no one else has been able to earn. That is worth more than all the bloodlines in the kingdom." He knelt beside Talia and Nikias, bringing himself to their level. Up close, he could see that Talia was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 20 at most. Her face was lovely in an understated way, with soft features and skin that held the warmth of summer wheat. But it was her eyes that caught him, honey gold and filled with such genuine compassion as she looked at his son that Alexandros felt his breath catch. "How did you do this?" he asked softly. Talia's cheeks flushed pink. I didn't do anything, Your Majesty. I've seen the young lord in the gardens sometimes when I'm hanging linens to dry. He watches the birds. I started leaving seeds out, and we'd watch them together, though we never spoke. I didn't know he couldn't speak. I just thought he was shy like me. I never meant to overstep. Please, You've been spending time with my son. Alexandros felt he should be angry at this breach of protocol, but all he could feel was a desperate gratitude. Someone had been caring for Nikias when everyone else had failed. Only from a distance, Talia said quickly. I never approached him. I never would have presumed. But he seemed so sad and the birds made him smile sometimes, so I wanted him to have that. Something small that was just for him. Nikias had fallen asleep in Talia's arms, his tear-stained face peaceful for the first time in months. His small fist was tangled in the fabric of her dress, holding on even in sleep. Alexandros made a decision that would shock the kingdom and change everything. The selection is over, he announced, rising to his feet and addressing the assembled crowd. There will be no queen chosen from among the noble houses today. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the court. The Omega candidates looked at each other in confusion and growing outrage. Instead, Alexandros continued, I am appointing Talia as the official caretaker and companion to my son. She will have quarters in the family wing of the palace. She will have access to Nikias whenever he needs her. And she will be under my personal protection. The implications of that last statement were not lost on anyone. To be under the king's personal protection meant she was untouchable, elevated far above her station, placed in a position that many would envy and some would resent. Lady Callista stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with fury. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. A common servant. In the royal quarters. What will the noble houses say? What will the council? The council will say what I tell them to say, Alexandros said coldly. I am still king. And as king, I do what is best for my heir. Right now, what is best for Nikias is having Talia near him. That is not negotiable. He looked down at Talia, who was staring up at him with an expression of pure shock. Can you stand? We need to move him to his chambers without waking him. Talia nodded mutely and allowed Alexandros to help her to her feet, the sleeping child cradled between them. As they walked together through the stunned crowd, Alexandros found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. She barely came up to his shoulder, this small Omega who had accomplished what no one else could. The walk to Nikias's chambers was silent except for the soft sound of their footsteps. The royal quarters were in the oldest part of the palace, where the stone walls held centuries of history and the windows looked out over the ancient forest that surrounded the capital. Nikias's room was filled with toys he no longer played with and books he no longer read, relics of the happy child he'd been before loss had stolen his voice. Talia laid him gently in his bed, carefully extracting her dress from his grip and replacing it with his favorite stuffed wolf. Nikias stirred but didn't wake. His small face relaxed in true rest. He hasn't slept well since his mother died, Alexandros said quietly, watching his son from the doorway. Nightmares every night. But he looks peaceful now. Talia smoothed the blanket over Nikias with tender care before stepping back. I'm so sorry for your loss, Your Majesty. And for his. Losing a parent so young. The pain must be unbearable. You speak as one who knows, Alexandros observed. Talia nodded, her eyes distant. I lost my mother when I was 7. My father when I was 15. I understand what it is to feel that emptiness, that sense that the world has become unsafe because the people who made it safe are gone. Is that why you left the seeds? Because you understood? Yes. Small kindnesses helped me survive my grief. I thought perhaps they might help him too. She turned to face him fully, and her expression was earnest. Your Majesty, I meant what I said. I never intended to overstep. I know my place. I don't seek to rise above my station or to claim anything I haven't earned. If you want me to help with Nikias, I will do so gladly. But please don't feel obligated because of what happened today. I'm sure in time he will respond to others as well. Alexandros studied her carefully. She genuinely believed what she was saying. She had no idea that what she'd done was nearly impossible, that teams of experts had failed where she'd succeeded simply by being kind. Talia, he said gently, do you know how many people have tried to reach my son in the last 6 months? She shook her head. 47. Healers, teachers, caregivers, child specialists from across the kingdom and beyond. Noble Omegas, hoping to win favor by comforting the heir. Counselors trained in trauma and grief. 47 people, and not one of them could get Nikias to speak, to cry, to show any emotion at all. He had locked himself away somewhere I couldn't reach him, and I was terrified I was losing him piece by piece. Talia's eyes widened. I didn't know. I truly thought he was just shy. You are the 48th person to try. And you are the only one who succeeded. Not because you tried but because you didn't. Because you simply offered kindness with no expectation of reward. Because you saw a sad child and wanted to help him, not advance your position. Alexandros took a step closer to her. That is not something I take lightly. That is not something I will dismiss. But the noble Omegas, Talia protested weakly. The alliance marriages, the political advantages, can all wait, Alexandros finished. My son cannot. His healing cannot. And right now you are the key to that healing. So yes, you will stay. Not as a servant, but as his companion. You will be compensated appropriately. You will be given status that reflects your importance to the heir. And you will be protected from anyone who tries to use you as a pawn in their political games. Talia looked like she wanted to argue further, but a small sound from the bed stopped her. Nikias was stirring, his hand reaching out in his sleep, searching for something. Without thinking, Talia returned to the bedside and took his small hand in hers. Nikias settled immediately, a small smile crossing his sleeping face. Alexandros felt that crack in his chest widen. His son was smiling. Actually smiling. Stay tonight, he heard himself say. There's a chair by his bed. I'll have proper accommodations arranged by morning, but tonight just stay. In case he wakes and needs you. Talia looked torn between duty and desire. Your Majesty, it wouldn't be proper for me to. I will be in my chambers next door. The nursemaid will be just outside. You will not be alone with him in any way that could be considered inappropriate. But he's holding your hand, Talia. He hasn't reached for anyone in 6 months. Please, let him have this. The plea in his voice, the vulnerability of a king begging a servant for help with his child, seemed to break through Talia's resistance. She nodded and settled into the chair, her hand still clasped in Nikias's small one. Thank you, Alexandros said softly. He called for the nursemaid and gave instructions that Talia was to have anything she needed and was not to be disturbed unless she asked for help. Then, reluctantly, he withdrew to his own chambers, though he left the connecting door slightly ajar so he could hear if Nikias woke. For the first time in 6 months, Alexandros slept through the night without being woken by his son's screams. Morning came with birdsong and golden light streaming through the palace windows. Alexandros dressed quickly and moved to check on Nikias, expecting to find the child asleep and Talia exhausted from her vigil. Instead, he found them in the garden. Nikias was scattering seeds for the birds, and Talia was naming each species as they landed. That's a sparrow, see his brown feathers. And there, that's a finch with the red on his head. Oh, look, a dove. Dove, Nikias repeated clearly, and Alexandros had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. Talia clapped her hands delightedly. Yes, exactly right. You're so clever, Nikias. The child beamed at her praise and scattered more seeds, clearly hoping to attract more birds to identify. Alexandros watched them for several minutes, afraid that if he announced his presence, the spell would break and Nikias would retreat back into silence. But Talia noticed him eventually and started to rise. Her expression worried that she'd done something wrong. "No, don't get up," Alexandros said quickly. "I'm just watching." "Continue, please." Nikias looked up and saw his father. For a moment, Alexandros braced himself for the familiar withdrawal, the way his son had been pulling away from him for months. But instead, Nikias ran to him and hugged his legs, just as he'd done with Talia yesterday. "Papa, birds," Nikias said excitedly, tugging on Alexandros's hand. "Come see." Alexandros's vision blurred with sudden tears. Papa. His son had called him Papa. He'd been afraid he'd never hear that word again. He let Nikias pull him into the garden and sat beside Talia on the stone bench, watching as his son enthusiastically scattered seeds and narrated the arrival of each bird in his limited vocabulary. It was the most normal, the most wonderfully mundane thing, and Alexandros treasured every second of it. "You've given me back my son," he said quietly to Talia. "In less than a day, you've given me back something I thought was lost forever." Talia kept her eyes on Nikias, but Alexandros saw the emotion in her face. "He was never lost, Your Majesty. He was just hurt and scared. He needed someone who understood that speaking wasn't the only way to communicate. The birds helped because they don't use words either. They just exist, beautifully and freely, and there's comfort in that. You're very wise for someone so young." "Not wise. Just experienced in grief." She finally looked at him, and the vulnerability in her honey-gold eyes made his breath catch. "I know what it's like to feel like the world has betrayed you, like speaking about your pain will make it more real, more permanent. Silence feels safer sometimes. But silence can also become a prison. Is that what happened to you?" She nodded slowly. "After my father died, I didn't speak for a month. I was living with a distant cousin who had taken me in out of obligation rather than love. Speaking felt like too much effort, like I would shatter if I tried to form words around the pain. The birds saved me too, in a way. I would sit in the garden and watch them, and eventually I started talking to them. Then to myself. Then to others again. No one helped you. Everyone was dealing with their own struggles. My cousin had 6 children of her own. I was just another mouth to feed, another burden. I learned to be quiet, to be useful, to not take up space I hadn't earned." She said it matter-of-factly without self-pity, which somehow made it more heartbreaking. Alexandros felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. This Omega had survived loss and neglect and had somehow emerged with her kindness intact, with her capacity for compassion undamaged. She was remarkable and she had no idea. "You have earned space here," he said firmly. "You've earned it 100 times over. I want you to understand that." Before Talia could respond, Nikias ran back to them with a handful of flowers he'd picked from the garden beds. "For Mama," he said, offering them to Talia. "Pretty like you." Talia's face went soft with such pure affection that Alexandros had to look away from the intimacy of the moment. She accepted the flowers gravely, as if they were the most precious gift in the world. "Thank you, sweet one. They're beautiful." She tucked one of the flowers behind her ear, and Nikias giggled with delight. The sound of his son's laughter, genuine and free, nearly undid Alexandros completely. He had thought that sound was gone forever, lost with his wife Alara in the accident that had taken her life. But here it was, resurrected by this small Omega who asked for nothing and gave everything. Over the following days, a new routine established itself in the palace. Talia moved into a suite of rooms in the family wing, much to the shock and gossip of the court. She spent her days with Nikias, coaxing him out of his shell word by word, smile by smile. She read him stories and walked with him in the gardens and let him help her with simple tasks, treating him not as a fragile prince but as a capable child who needed purpose and connection. And Nikias bloomed under her care like a flower finding sun after a long winter. Alexandros found himself drawn to them more and more, finding excuses to join their activities, to observe their interactions. He told himself it was simply to monitor his son's progress, but he knew it was more than that. He was fascinated by Talia, by her gentle strength, by the way she could be firm with Nikias when needed but never harsh, by her insight into his son's needs that seemed almost mystical in its accuracy. "He's testing boundaries today," she told Alexandros one afternoon after Nikias had refused to come inside for his nap. "He needs to know that the rules still apply, that the world still has structure even though his mother is gone. Consistency is comforting when everything else feels uncertain." She was right, of course. Once Alexandros calmly but firmly insisted on the nap, Nikias complied without further argument and slept soundly. He woke cheerful and cooperative, as if the boundary had reassured him rather than restricted him. "How did you know?" Alexandros asked her later, when Nikias was occupied with his tutors. "Because I needed the same thing at his age," Talia said simply. "After my mother died, I became wild for a while, acting out, breaking rules. I wanted someone to stop me, to prove that there were still adults in control, that I was still safe even though I felt so unsafe. When my father provided that structure without anger, just calm consistency, I settled. I learned that discipline could be another form of love." "You would have made an excellent mother," Alexandros said without thinking, and then immediately regretted it when Talia's face fell. "I've never thought about having children of my own," she said quietly. "Omegas of my station rarely have that choice. We're lucky if we find mates at all, and children are seen as liabilities when you're struggling to survive." Alexandros felt anger on her behalf, anger at a system that had relegated someone so capable and caring to the shadows of society. "You deserve more than survival, Talia. You deserve a life of your choosing. You deserve to be valued." She looked at him with those honey-gold eyes, and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous and completely inappropriate given their positions. Alexandros was the king. Talia was a servant, elevated yes, but still far below his station. And yet the connection was undeniable, growing stronger each day they spent in each other's company. It was Talia who looked away first, breaking the moment. "I should check on Nikias. His lessons should be finished by now." She fled before Alexandros could respond, leaving him alone with thoughts he shouldn't be having about an Omega he had no right to want. But the heart, as Alexandros was learning, did not care about propriety or station or political complications. The heart wanted what it wanted, and his heart was increasingly drawn to the small Omega who had brought light back into his darkest hour. The court naturally noticed. Gossip spread through the palace like wildfire. Some saw Talia as an opportunist, a servant using the heir to gain power and influence. Others saw her as a threat to the established order, a commoner who had risen too far too fast. And a few, the most perceptive ones, saw the truth, that the king was falling for the Omega who had saved his son. Lady Callista, in particular, was incensed. She had expected to be queen. She had prepared for it her entire life, groomed by her family to be the perfect royal mate. To be passed over for a nobody, a servant with no connections or influence, was an insult she could not forgive. She began to plot. Carefully, subtly, she started spreading poison. She whispered in the right ears, suggested doubts to the council members, implied that Talia was using some kind of Omega magic to manipulate the king and the heir. She painted Talia as a schemer, a social climber who had deliberately positioned herself to capture the king's attention. The whispers reached Talia's ears, of course. Servants always heard everything. She said nothing, but Alexandros noticed how she became more withdrawn, how she started pulling back from him, maintaining a more formal distance even as she remained warm and open with Nikias. It broke his heart to see her retreating behind walls of propriety, but he understood why. The court was making her life difficult. His protection could only go so far. If he pushed too hard, insisted too much on her elevated status, he would make her a target for even more vicious attacks. He needed to do something decisive. Something that would settle the matter once and for all. 3 weeks after Talia had first spoken to Nikias, Alexandros called a formal council meeting. All the nobles and high-ranking officials gathered in the great hall, wondering what announcement the king would make. Alexandros stood before them with Nikias at his side, his son holding his hand with the confidence of a child who had rediscovered his security. Talia stood apart from them, dressed in the fine clothes Alexandros had provided but looking uncomfortable under the weight of so many stares. 3 weeks ago, Alexandros began, his voice carrying through the hall, I held a selection to choose a queen. I invited the finest Omega candidates from across the kingdom, each exemplary in lineage and accomplishment. And yet I chose none of them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was old news, but the reminder still stung for many who had expected different outcomes. I chose instead to focus on my son's healing, to prioritize his needs over political alliances and traditional expectations. Some have questioned this decision. Some have suggested that I was manipulated, or that I allowed sentiment to override good judgment. His eyes found Lady Callista in the crowd, and she had the grace to look away. Let me be clear. I made the only decision that mattered. My son comes first. Always. Nikias squeezed his father's hand, sensing the importance of the moment even if he didn't fully understand it. Over these past weeks, I have watched my heir transform. He has gone from a silent, withdrawn child to a happy, talkative boy who loves birds and stories and learning new things. He sleeps through the night. He laughs. He plays. He has become himself again. Alexandros's voice roughened with emotion. This miracle, and it is nothing short of a miracle, is due to one person. Talia. All eyes turned to her. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Talia did not seek this role. She did not maneuver or scheme. She simply showed kindness to a grieving child, expecting nothing in return. And in doing so, she proved herself more valuable to this kingdom than any political alliance could ever be. He paused, letting his words sink in. She has also proven something else to me. She has proven that worth is not determined by birth or station. That the content of one's character matters more than the circumstances of one's origin. That sometimes the most important people are the ones we overlook because we're too focused on titles and lineages. Alexandros turned to Talia, and his expression softened. Talia, would you come here please? She approached slowly, her head bowed, every line of her body screaming reluctance. When she reached him, Alexandros took her hand, and the entire court gasped. It was a gesture of intimacy, of claiming that could not be mistaken. I am not choosing a queen today, Alexandros said. That decision requires more thought and more time. But I am making an official declaration. Talia is to be given the title of royal companion to the heir. She will have all the rights and privileges of a high-born noble. She will answer only to me and to Nikias. And she will be treated with the respect she deserves, or those who disrespect her will answer to me personally. The court erupted in shocked conversation. This was unprecedented. Royal companion was not a traditional title, which meant Alexandros had created it specifically for Talia. It placed her in a position of significant power while avoiding the political complications of marriage. It was a brilliant move, and it also revealed the king's hand more clearly than any verbal declaration could have. Alexandros was protecting Talia the only way he could, by making her too important to attack openly. Talia looked up at him with wonder and fear mingled in her expression. Your Majesty, she whispered, you don't have to do this. I don't need titles or status. I just want to help Nikias. I know you don't need it, Alexandros said softly, just for her ears. But you deserve it. And more importantly, this protects you from those who would use you as a weapon against me or against themselves. Accept this, Talia. Please. She searched his face, looking for something, and whatever she found must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. If it helps Nikias, then I accept. It helps all of us, Alexandros said. He lifted her hand and pressed a formal kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of respect that sent another wave of shocked whispers through the crowd. Thank you. The meeting concluded with Alexandros fielding questions and concerns from the council, most of which he deflected or dismissed. The message was clear. He had made his decision, and it was final. As the crowd dispersed, Lady Callista approached him with barely controlled fury in her eyes. "You're making a mistake, Your Majesty. The noble houses will not accept this. They will see it as an insult to their daughters, to their lineages. Then they can withdraw their daughters and focus on more productive pursuits," Alexandros said coldly. "I am not interested in placating injured pride at the expense of my son's well-being. If the noble houses want influence in this court, they can earn it through service and merit, not through strategic marriages." "She's bewitched you," Callista hissed. "Both of you. There's no other explanation for how a common servant could." "Be careful," Alexandros interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Be very careful what you accuse her of. Talia has done nothing but show kindness and competence. If you have proof of wrongdoing, present it. Otherwise, you're simply bitter that you were not chosen, and that is not a crime she has committed." Callista opened her mouth to argue further, but something in Alexandros's expression stopped her. She curtsied stiffly and withdrew, though the malice in her eyes promised this was not over. Alexandros watched her go with a sense of foreboding. He had made enemies today, powerful ones. But he had also drawn a line in the sand. Talia was under his protection, and he would not allow anyone to harm her. He found her later in Nikias's room, reading him a bedtime story. The domestic simplicity of the scene made his chest ache. This is what his life could be, he realized. Not grand political alliances or cold strategic marriages, but this quiet warmth, this genuine connection with people who mattered. Nikias fell asleep midway through the story, and Talia carefully marked their place in the book before tucking him in. She kissed his forehead gently, a gesture so maternal and natural that Alexandros felt his resolve crystallize. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. Talia hesitated, then nodded. They left Nikias with his nursemaid and walked through the palace gardens in the moonlight. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of night-blooming flowers. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you today," Alexandros said eventually. "But I needed to make your position clear. You were being targeted, Talia. I couldn't let that continue." "I know," she said softly. "I heard the whispers. Lady Callista has been particularly vocal. She's angry that she wasn't chosen. But her anger is not your fault or your problem. Isn't it though?" Talia stopped walking and turned to face him. "Your Majesty, I'm a servant. I was nobody until I happened to be in the right place when Nikias needed someone. I don't belong in this world of titles and politics. I don't know how to navigate these waters. Every day I'm afraid I'll make a mistake that will reflect badly on you or on Nikias." "You haven't made a single mistake," Alexandros said firmly. "Not one. You've been perfect with my son. You've been gracious under pressure. You've handled the scrutiny of the court with dignity. You have nothing to apologize for. But I'm not what anyone expected for you. I'm not what the kingdom needs in a—" She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she was about to step into dangerous territory. "In a queen," Alexandros finished for her. "Is that what you were going to say?" Talia's silence was answer enough. Alexandros took a step closer to her, close enough to see the way the moonlight caught in her honey-gold eyes. "What if I told you that you're exactly what I need? What if I told you that over these past weeks, I've watched you with my son and seen not just a caretaker but a partner? Someone who understands what matters, who values connection over status, who has the strength to be gentle and the courage to be kind even when it would be easier to be hard." "Your Majesty, please don't." "Alexandros," he corrected softly. "My name is Alexandros. And I need you to hear this, Talia. I'm not making you royal companion because of gratitude or obligation. I'm doing it because you've become important to me. Because when I think about the future, I see you in it. Because my son calls you Mama and he's not wrong to do so." Talia's eyes filled with tears. "You can't mean that. You're a king. You need alliances, strategic marriages, political advantages. I can give you none of those things. You give me something infinitely more valuable. You give me peace. You give me a reason to smile again. You give my son the security and love he desperately needs. Those things are worth more than all the political advantages in the world. The court will never accept it, she whispered. The court will accept what I tell them to accept. I am still King Talia. I still have the power to make my own choices. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hands. Tell me you feel nothing. Tell me these weeks together have meant nothing to you, and I'll step back. I'll maintain a proper distance. But if there's even a chance that you feel something too. Of course I feel something, Talia said, her voice breaking. I've tried so hard not to, tried to remember my place, tried to keep my heart locked away where it couldn't get me into trouble. But how could I not fall for you? You're everything good and strong and honorable. You love your son with your whole heart. You treat everyone with respect regardless of their station. She stopped, overwhelmed. Alexandros felt triumph and tenderness surge through him in equal measure. Then give us a chance. Give me a chance to court you properly, to show you that this is real and lasting. I'm not asking you to be queen tomorrow. I'm asking for time. Time to prove that what we have is worth fighting for. People will talk, Talia said, but her objection was weakening. People are already talking. Let them. Let them see that their king chooses substance over superficiality, that I value what's in someone's heart more than what's on their family crest. He brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Let them see that love is stronger than protocol. The word love hung between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Alexandros hadn't planned to say it, but now that it was out, he realized it was true. He was falling in love with this small omega who had changed everything. I'm scared, Talia admitted. So am I, Alexandros said honestly. I lost my first wife. The pain of that loss nearly destroyed me. The thought of opening my heart again, of risking that kind of devastation. It terrifies me. But I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life in the safety of loneliness. I'm more afraid of denying what could be because I'm too frightened to reach for it. Talia looked at him for a long moment, and then, in a gesture of remarkable courage, she reached up and placed her small hand over his where it still cradled her cheek. Then I suppose we'll be scared together. Alexandros smiled, genuine and warm, and bent to press his forehead against hers. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it was a promise. Beginning. They stood there in the moonlit garden, two wounded souls finding unexpected healing in each other, while inside the palace, a small boy slept peacefully, dreaming of birds and flowers and the people who loved him. The following weeks brought challenges, as Alexandros had known they would. The noble houses were divided in their response to Talia's elevation. Some saw it as a refreshing break from tradition, a sign that the king valued merit over politics. Others saw it as a dangerous precedent that threatened the established social order. Lady Callista continued her campaign of whispered poison, though she was more subtle about it now, aware that open attacks would bring the king's wrath down on her head. She gathered allies among the more conservative nobles, those who believed that mixing the classes would lead to chaos and the erosion of proper hierarchy. But for every enemy Talia gained, she also gained supporters. The common people loved the story of the servant who had captured the king's heart through kindness rather than calculation. They saw themselves in her, saw hope that worth could be recognized regardless of origin. Songs began to be sung about her in taverns and market squares, romantic ballads about the shy Omega and the powerful Alpha who chose love over duty. Talia tried to ignore both the praise and the criticism, focusing instead on Nikias and his continued progress. The child was thriving in ways that amazed everyone who had known him during his silent months. He was curious, energetic, affectionate, and increasingly comfortable in his role as heir. He also continued to call Talia Mama, which both delighted and complicated things. Alexandros never corrected him, and neither did Talia, though she sometimes worried they were setting the boy up for disappointment if things didn't work out as Alexandros hoped. He needs this right now, Alexandros told her when she voiced her concerns. He needs to feel that security, that maternal love. Whatever happens between us, you'll always be important to him. That won't change. But what if you eventually marry someone else? Talia asked. Another Omega, someone more suitable for the political realities of your position? How will Nikias understand why his mama is no longer? I won't marry someone else, Alexandros interrupted firmly. I've made my choice, Talia. I'm choosing you. The only question is whether you'll eventually choose me back. It was both pressure and freedom, that declaration. Pressure because it placed the future in her hands, but freedom because it meant she didn't have to compete with hypothetical other Omegas for his attention. He had decided. Now she just had to decide if she was brave enough to accept what he was offering. As spring turned to summer, Alexandros courted Talia with patient determination. He invited her to walk with him in the gardens each evening after Nikias was asleep. He brought her small gifts, nothing extravagant that might make her uncomfortable, but thoughtful things. A book of poetry she'd mentioned wanting to read, seeds for flowers she'd admired, a shawl in her favorite shade of blue. He introduced her to the council members one by one, forcing them to see her as a person rather than a political inconvenience. Many were won over by her intelligence and genuine interest in the kingdom's welfare. She had opinions about education reform and food distribution that were surprisingly well informed for someone who had never received formal training in governance. I've been hungry, she explained simply when Alexandros asked how she knew so much about the challenges facing common people. I've stood in bread lines and rationed meals and gone to bed with my stomach aching because there wasn't enough. I've seen children turned away from schools because their parents couldn't afford the fees. These aren't theoretical problems to me. They're my life, or they were. Her insights proved invaluable. Alexandros began including her in policy discussions, and her perspective helped shape initiatives that actually reached the people who needed them most. The council members who had initially dismissed her as a pretty distraction were forced to acknowledge her value beyond her relationship with the king. But the greatest testament to Talia's impact came from Nikias himself. The heir was now studying with tutors again, excelling in subjects that had once frustrated him. He was learning history and mathematics and languages, and he approached each lesson with enthusiasm because Talia had taught him that learning was an adventure rather than a chore. One afternoon, his primary tutor, an elderly scholar named Philippos, sought out Alexandros with an unusual request. Your Majesty, I must speak with you about the Lady Talia, Philippos said formally. Alexandros tensed, preparing for criticism or complaint. What about her? She's been teaching Nikias, Philippos said. Not formally, not in structured lessons, but through games and stories and conversations. And Your Majesty, she's brilliant at it. The boy has learned more practical knowledge in the past 2 months than in the previous year of formal instruction. He understands complex concepts because she presents them in ways that make sense to a child his age. Alexandros relaxed slightly. You're not concerned that she's overstepping? Overstepping. Your Majesty, I'm asking if she would be willing to help train our other tutors in her methods. What she does instinctively, we could learn to do deliberately. She could revolutionize how we educate young nobles. Philippos's old eyes were bright with excitement. She has a gift, sire. It would be a waste not to use it for the benefit of the realm. This conversation was repeated in various forms by various people over the following weeks. The head gardener wanted Talia's input on creating therapeutic gardens for grief counseling. The royal physician asked if she would share her insights on helping traumatized children. The master of orphans requested her assistance in developing better care protocols for children who had lost parents. Talia was overwhelmed by the requests but also energized by them. She had spent so many years feeling useless, like a burden to be endured, and now people were actively seeking her knowledge and skills. It was transformative. Alexandros watched her bloom with pride and love. This was who she was meant to be, he realized. Not hidden in shadows, scrubbing pots in a kitchen, but here in the light, using her gifts to help others. 3 months after Nikias had first called her mama, Alexandros decided it was time to make his intentions absolutely clear to everyone. He planned a summer festival, a celebration that would bring together nobles and commoners alike. It would be the perfect setting for what he had in mind. The day of the festival was perfect, with clear skies and warm sunshine. The palace grounds were open to the public, and thousands of people came to enjoy the food, music, and entertainment. Alexandros had made sure the celebrations were accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy, and the atmosphere was joyful and relaxed. As evening approached, Alexandros took to a raised platform in the center of the festivities. Beside him stood Nikias, dressed in his finest clothes, and Talia, looking beautiful and nervous in a gown of deep gold that matched her eyes. "My people," Alexandros began, his voice carrying over the crowd, "thank you for joining us in this celebration. Today we honor the strength of our kingdom, the bonds of our community, and the hope we carry for the future." The crowd cheered, wine and good food having put everyone in excellent spirits. 3 months ago, my son was lost to grief. He had stopped speaking, stopped engaging with the world, and I feared I would never reach him again. Alexandros placed his hand on Nikias's shoulder. Then this remarkable woman entered our lives. Talia, who asked for nothing, who expected no reward, who simply saw a sad child and wanted to help him. Talia's eyes went wide. This was not what she had expected. Alexandros had told her she would attend the festival, but he hadn't mentioned a public speech. "Talia gave me back my son," Alexandros continued. "But she also gave me something else. She reminded me that the most important qualities a person can have are kindness, compassion, and courage. Not the courage to fight battles or conquer enemies, but the courage to be vulnerable, to care about others, to risk your heart even when life has taught you that hearts can be broken." He turned to face Talia directly, and the entire crowd fell silent, sensing something momentous was about to happen. "Talia," Alexandros said, his voice softer now but still clear, "you came into my life at my darkest moment and brought light. You've shown me what it means to truly see someone, to value them for who they are rather than what they can offer. You've been patient with my fears, gentle with my grief, and strong enough to stand beside me even when doing so made you a target for criticism and gossip." Talia's hands were shaking. Tears were streaming down her face, though she didn't seem aware of them. "I'm not asking you to be my queen tonight," Alexandros said. "That's a decision too large to make in a single moment, with thousands of people watching. But I'm asking if you'll accept my formal courtship. If you'll stand with me as my chosen partner, my intended mate, the Omega I hope will someday agree to rule beside me." He held out his hand to her, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. The crowd held its collective breath. Talia looked at his hand, then at his face, then out at the sea of people watching them. Nobles and servants, wealthy merchants and struggling farmers, all waiting to see what the shy Omega would do. She thought about the girl she had been, the one who had learned to make herself small, to expect nothing, to be grateful for scraps of kindness. She thought about the fear that still lived in her chest, the voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, that this was all a dream that would end in heartbreak and humiliation. But then she looked at Nikias, whose small face was hopeful and trusting, who had called her mama from the first moment he saw her and had never wavered in that certainty. She looked at Alexandros, whose eyes held only love and hope and patient waiting. And she made her choice. She placed her hand in his. The crowd erupted in cheers so loud they seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Alexandros pulled her close, not kissing her, not yet, but holding her like she was precious beyond measure. Nikias wrapped his arms around both their legs, completing their small circle. "You're sure?" Alexandros murmured into her hair, just loud enough for her to hear beneath the roar of celebration. "I'm terrified," Talia admitted. "But yes, I'm sure." That night, after the festival had ended and Nikias was asleep, Alexandros and Talia sat together in the garden where they'd first admitted their feelings. The moon was full and bright, painting everything in silver light. "You know this won't be easy," Alexandros said. There will still be opposition. Lady Callista and her supporters won't give up their campaign just because we've made a public declaration. If anything, they'll intensify their efforts. I know, Talia said. But I'm not the scared girl I was 3 months ago. You've helped me see my own worth. Nikias has helped me see that I have something valuable to offer. I can face whatever comes, as long as I don't have to face it alone. You'll never be alone, Alexandros promised. I will stand with you through everything. The council meetings where people question your qualifications. The social events where nobles snub you. The moments when you doubt yourself and wonder if you made the right choice. I will be there, reminding you that you are exactly where you belong. Talia leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. Tell me about her, she said softly. About Ilara. I need to know about her, not as a ghost between us, but as the woman you loved, the mother of your child. Alexandros was quiet for a long moment, and Talia worried she had overstepped. But then he began to speak. Ilara was brilliant and fierce. She challenged me constantly, never let me settle for easy answers or convenient half-truths. She was a warrior in her own right, trained in combat and strategy. She would have laughed at the idea of a shy Omega winning my heart. He smiled at the memory. But she also would have loved you, I think. She valued strength in all its forms, and she would have recognized the strength it takes to be gentle in a harsh world. How did she die? Talia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Hunting accident. She was tracking a wounded boar, and it turned on her faster than anyone expected. By the time help arrived, she had lost too much blood. She died protecting her companions, making sure they got to safety before she allowed herself to fall. His voice was rough with old pain. She died the way she lived, putting others first, fighting until her last breath. Nikias must miss her terribly. He does. But you've helped him process that grief in ways no one else could. You haven't tried to replace her. You've simply loved him for who he is, and somehow that's allowed him to hold his memories of her without being destroyed by them. Alexandros turned to look at Talia fully. You've healed both of us. Do you understand that? Both of us were broken, and you've helped make us whole again. I'm not a healer, Talia protested. I'm just someone who cares. That's exactly what makes you a healer, Alexandros said. The best kind. They sat together until the moon set and dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, hopes for their future, fears and dreams, and all the messy, complicated truths that make up a real relationship. As the sun rose, Alexandros stood and offered Talia his hand. Come. Let's check on Nikias before the palace wakes and duty calls us in different directions. They walked hand in hand to Nikias's chambers, and found him already awake, sitting up in bed and playing with his stuffed wolf. When he saw them, his face lit up with pure joy. Mama. Mpa. You're together. We are, Alexandros confirmed, sitting on the edge of the bed. Is that all right with you? Nikias launched himself at them, hugging them both with all the strength his small body could muster. Yes, I wanted Mama to stay forever. Now she will, right? Talia caught Alexandros's eye over their son's head. Their son. She was already thinking of him that way, she realized. This child who had chosen her before she had chosen herself. Yes, she said softly. I'll stay forever. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. Alexandros formally announced his intention to marry Talia, setting a date for the following spring to give everyone time to adjust to the idea and to prepare for a wedding that would unite traditional ceremony with new, more inclusive elements. The council, seeing that Alexandros would not be swayed, eventually accepted the inevitable. Some did so grudgingly, others with genuine warmth. But all recognized that opposing the king's chosen mate would be both futile and politically unwise. Lady Callista made one last attempt to undermine Talia's position. She brought accusations of Omega manipulation magic to the council, claiming that no alpha as strong as Alexandros could possibly fall for a common servant without supernatural influence. The accusation was serious enough that it had to be investigated. Talia was examined by 3 independent healers, all of whom confirmed that she possessed no unusual abilities, no magic, no powers beyond those of any normal Omega. She was simply herself, kind and caring and completely ordinary in every measurable way. The failed accusation cost Lady Callista what remained of her credibility. She was quietly encouraged to return to her family estates and focus on finding a different path forward. She left the capital in disgrace, her dreams of becoming queen shattered beyond repair. Talia felt sorry for her, which surprised Alexandros. "She tried to destroy you," he pointed out. "She wanted to see you humiliated and cast out." "I know," Talia said. But she was taught that her worth depended on making a prestigious match. Her entire identity was wrapped up in becoming queen. Losing that must feel like losing herself. "I understand that kind of loss, even if I don't condone her methods." Alexandros pulled her close, marveling once again at her capacity for empathy. "You're going to make a remarkable queen." "I'm going to make a lot of mistakes," Talia corrected. "But hopefully I'll learn from them." Winter came, and with it the first real test of Talia's new position. A delegation from a neighboring kingdom arrived to negotiate a trade agreement. The visiting Alpha King, Leonidas, was old-fashioned and traditional. He made no secret of his disapproval of Alexandros's choice of mate. "A servant queen," Leonidas said at the formal dinner, his tone making it clear what he thought of that. "How progressive of you, Alexandros. A queen chosen for her character rather than her bloodline," Alexandros corrected coolly. "Yes, I consider that progress. And when you need military alliances, when you need economic support, what will her family connections bring you?" "Perspective," Alexandros said. "Understanding of how policies affect ordinary people. Insights that no amount of noble breeding could provide. Things that are far more valuable than another trade route or mutual defense pact." Talia, sitting beside Alexandros at the high table, felt every eye on her. This was the moment Leonidas was trying to create, the public humiliation that would prove she was unsuitable. She could remain silent, let Alexandros defend her. Or she could speak for herself. She chose to speak. "King Leonidas," she said, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. "You're right that I bring no family connections, no useful alliances. I'm not the strategic choice. But may I ask you a question?" Leonidas looked surprised that she would address him directly, but nodded. "Speak. In your kingdom, how are the orphans cared for? The children who lose parents to war or disease or accident. They're given to the temples or to willing families. Why? And the families who take them in, are they compensated? Supported by the crown? Of course not. It's considered a charitable act, a service to the gods." Talia nodded. "In Alexandros's kingdom, we're implementing a new system. Families who take in orphans receive financial support from the royal treasury. The children receive education and healthcare. They're not treated as charity cases but as valued future citizens. This program was designed based on my experiences as an orphan, my understanding of what those children need." She leaned forward slightly. "I also helped redesign the grain distribution system to prevent the hoarding that was driving up prices and starving the poor. I consulted on new apprenticeship programs that give children from all backgrounds access to skilled trades. I may not bring you an alliance, King Leonidas, but I bring my king the ability to improve his people's lives in tangible, measurable ways. Is that not also valuable?" The table had gone silent. Leonidas stared at her, clearly reassessing his assumptions. Finally, he let out a bark of laughter. "Well said, girl. Well said indeed. Perhaps there's more to this match than I first thought." He raised his glass. "To Queen Talia, who proves that power comes in unexpected forms." The table drank to her, and Talia felt Alexandros's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. She had passed the test. More importantly, she had shown everyone present that she wouldn't be cowed or silenced, that she had a voice and the courage to use it. The winter passed with Talia growing more confident in her role and more beloved by the common people. She made a habit of visiting different parts of the kingdom, talking to farmers and merchants and craftspeople, listening to their concerns and bringing their voices back to the council. She became known as the people's queen, even before her actual coronation. Nikias continued to thrive under her care. He was now 5 years old, bright and curious and well-adjusted. He still called her Mama, and no one questioned it anymore. To everyone who mattered, that's exactly what she was. Spring arrived with a riot of flowers and warming weather. The palace was a flurry of activity as preparations for the royal wedding intensified. Talia was measured for gowns, taught protocols, briefed on ceremonies. It was overwhelming, but she took it one day at a time, supported by Alexandros and by the friends she had made among the palace staff who remembered when she was one of them. A week before the wedding, Talia asked Alexandros to walk with her in the gardens. They hadn't had much time alone together in the chaos of planning, and she missed the quiet intimacy they'd built. Nervous? Alexandros asked as they wandered among the roses. Terrified, Talia admitted. Not of marrying you. That's the only part I'm sure about. But of everything else. Being queen. Living up to everyone's expectations. Not disappointing you or Nikias or the people who believe in me. You could never disappoint me, Alexandros said firmly. You've already exceeded every hope I had when I first asked you to stay. You've transformed not just my life and Nikias's life, but the entire kingdom. You've shown us what's possible when we value people for who they are rather than where they come from. I just want to be good enough, Talia whispered. Alexandros stopped walking and turned her to face him. You are enough. You've always been enough. The girl who left seeds for the birds, who saw a sad child and wanted to help him, who faced down disapproval and criticism with grace and courage, that girl is exactly who should be queen. Not in spite of where you came from, but because of it. He cupped her face in his hands, and this time, finally, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Talia felt something settle into place inside her chest, a missing piece she hadn't known she was looking for. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Alexandros rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Talia. I've loved you since the moment you held my son and gave him back his voice. I'll love you until my last breath. I love you too, Talia said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I think I've loved you since you gave me permission to touch Nikias, since you trusted me with what mattered most to you. I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that trust. You already are, Alexandros murmured and kissed her again. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Talia dressed in her bridal gown, white silk embroidered with gold threads that caught the light with every movement, and looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked regal and confident, nothing like the frightened servant who had tried to disappear into shadows 9 months ago. But when she looked closer, she could see that girl was still there, in the gentleness of her eyes, in the soft curve of her smile. She hadn't lost herself in becoming queen. She had simply expanded to fill a space she hadn't known was waiting for her. The ceremony was held in the great cathedral, witnessed by thousands. Nobles and commoners alike filled the pews, united in their desire to see this unprecedented wedding. As Talia walked down the aisle, she saw faces filled with hope and joy, people who saw in her story a reflection of their own dreams. Nikias walked beside her, carrying the rings on a small cushion, proud of his important role. When they reached the altar where Alexandros waited, the boy held up the cushion with both hands. For you and Mama, he announced clearly. So you can be married forever. Laughter rippled through the cathedral, warm and affectionate. Alexandros took one ring and Talia took the other, and they spoke the ancient vows that would bind them together as mates and partners. When Alexandros slipped the ring onto Talia's finger, his hand trembled slightly. When Talia did the same for him, her eyes were bright with happy tears. And when the priest pronounced them married and Alexandros kissed his new queen, The cathedral erupted in cheers that could be heard across the entire city. The celebration lasted 3 days. There was feasting and dancing and music, and Talia made sure that the palace gates stayed open so that common people could participate fully. She danced with Alexandros and with Nikias and with servants she had once worked beside. She spoke with nobles and farmers, merchants and soldiers, making each person feel valued and seen. On the third night, when the festivities finally wound down and the guests began to depart, Talia and Alexandros stood on their private balcony and looked out over the city. Lights twinkled in windows across the capital, signs of life and hope and continuity. "No regrets?" Alexandros asked, pulling her against his chest. Talia leaned into his warmth and felt completely, perfectly happy. "Not a single one. Even though you'll spend the rest of your life dealing with council meetings and diplomatic dinners and people questioning your decisions." "Even though," Talia confirmed. "Because I'll also spend the rest of my life with you and Nikias. I'll get to help people who need help. I'll get to make changes that matter. And I'll wake up every morning knowing that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Alexandros kissed the top of her head. "You've changed everything, you know. The entire kingdom is different because you walked into that hall 9 months ago." "Nikias changed everything," Talia corrected. "He's the one who called me mama. He's the one who chose me first." "Then he has excellent judgment," Alexandros said with a smile. "Just like his father." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the palace, Nikias slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that his family was complete. In the city below, people told stories about the servant who became queen, about the alpha who chose love over politics, about the child whose one word had changed the course of a kingdom. And in the garden where it had all begun, the birds sang their evening songs, and the flowers bloomed in the twilight, and the world turned toward tomorrow, full of promise and possibility. Talia had spent most of her life believing she was nobody special, destined for a small life in the shadows. But she had learned that sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the smallest acts of kindness. That courage isn't the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. That worth isn't determined by birth or status, but by the content of one's character and the depth of one's compassion. She had learned that she was enough, exactly as she was. And in learning that, she had become the queen her people needed, the mother Nikias deserved, and the partner Alexandros had hoped for but never dared to dream he'd actually find. Years passed, and the kingdom prospered under their joint rule. Talia continued her work improving the lives of common people, creating systems and programs that became models for other kingdoms. She and Alexandros had 2 more children, a daughter named Lyra and a son named Perseus, and all 3 children grew up understanding that true nobility came from service and compassion rather than titles and bloodlines. Nikias, when he eventually became king himself, ruled with his mother's gentleness and his father's strength. He married for love rather than politics, following the example his parents had set. And he made sure that his kingdom was one where worth was recognized regardless of origin, where kindness mattered more than status, where every child had the opportunity to become their best self. The story of how a shy Omega walked into a royal hall and changed everything became legend, told and retold across generations. It became a story about hope and transformation, about the power of choosing compassion over convention, about recognizing value in unexpected places. But for Talia herself, the story was simpler than that. It was a story about a sad child who needed love, and a lonely woman who needed purpose, and how they found each other at exactly the right moment. It was a story about seeds scattered for birds, about small acts of kindness that bloomed into something beautiful. It was a story about refusing to be limited by other people's expectations, about believing that you deserve to take up space in the world, about having the courage to accept love when it's offered. It was, in the end, a story about coming home to a place you didn't know existed until you arrived. And every night, when Talia climbed into bed beside her Alpha King, when she kissed her children goodnight, when she looked around at the life she had built from nothing but courage and kindness, she whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force had brought her to that palace garden on that fateful day. Because she had been lost, and now she was found. She had been nobody, and now she was somebody. She had been alone, and now she was loved beyond measure. And that, more than any crown or title, was what made her rich beyond imagining. The story ends not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with quiet contentment. With a family sleeping peacefully under one roof. With a kingdom slowly but surely becoming more just and compassionate. With an Omega who learned she had always been worthy of love, and an Alpha who learned that the best choices often defy convention. It ends with a child's voice years ago saying "Mama" to a stranger, and that stranger having the courage to respond, to stay, to love. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with a single word, spoken by a brave child to a kind heart. Sometimes the greatest love stories start not with passion, but with compassion. Sometimes the perfect person for you is the one you would never have chosen, the one who chooses you first, the one who sees your worth before you see it yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales do come true. Not because of magic or destiny, but because people have the courage to believe in each other, to fight for each other, to build something beautiful together from the broken pieces they bring. This was such a story. The story of Alexandros and Talia and Nikias. The story of how a kingdom learned that love is stronger than tradition, that worth transcends status, that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. The story of how one shy Omega refused to believe she was powerless, and in doing so, changed the world. Her world at least. And really, isn't that all any of us can do? Change our own world, one small act of kindness at a time, trusting that those acts will ripple outward in ways we can't predict or control. Talia thought so. And she spent the rest of her long, happy life proving it. Word by word. Moment by moment. Choice by choice. Until the day she died, beloved and mourned by thousands, she never forgot the frightened servant girl she'd been. She kept that girl alive in her heart, used her memories to fuel her compassion, drew on her experiences to inform her wisdom. And every spring, on the anniversary of the day Nikias first called her mama, she would go to the garden and scatter seeds for the birds, remembering how such small acts could change everything. The birds would come, just as they always had. And Talia would smile, surrounded by the family she had found and the life she had built. She would smile, and know that she was exactly where she belonged. Finally, completely, perfectly home.